What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another Unpopular Opinion, and today we're reviewing the 1998 Terrance Malick war movie, The Thin Red Line. The Thin Red Line is a war film that takes place in the Pacific theater of World War II, more specifically the Guadalcanal Campaign. Guys, I watched this movie for the first time a little over a month ago, and I was considering doing a first-time movie reaction for it, but I'm glad I didn't. Usually when I discuss a movie, I take a hard stance on it, but today, I don't really know. This is a hard movie to dissect. If you had asked me my opinion on it after my first time watching it, I would have told you I hated it, and it's one of the worst movies ever. But some time has passed, and it's grown on me a little bit. I can't stop thinking about it, and I've revisited it a few times. So today, I'm just gonna share my overall opinions on what I liked and what I didn't like. So starting off with some positives about this movie, I want to say that the direction and cinematography was very good for the most part. Another thing that gives it brownie points is how it gives off a 1990s VHS nostalgia feeling. What I mean by that is I was born in the 90s, and I remember using VHS tapes, and the feeling that they gave off, such as rewinding or the visual quality, it just reminds me of when I was younger, and it gives off early 2000s vibes. So I could definitely see my younger self watching this on a VHS tape when times were good. So this movie gave me that nostalgia. However, I do have a lot of issues with this movie. Firstly, it's a hard film to watch, not because it's graphic and disturbing, actually it's the opposite, but because the pacing and how it unfolds, it's so bizarre and it makes the viewing experience very difficult. Not to mention its overall lack of structure and plot. Honestly, the best kind of plot I can conjure when someone asks what this movie's about, it's an ensemble cast that features soldiers fighting in the Guadalcanal Campaign. And that's really it, because the film doesn't really have a central protagonist, and nothing playing out on screen feels like it's grounded to the present. And what I mean by that is the pacing is really slow and flows like watching someone paint a picture out of order. The movie switches between flashbacks, slow motion sequences, jumps between different character perspectives to rapidly, and plays mystical music. So when I'm watching the movie, I don't feel like I'm watching anything that's tethered to the present time. It feels like a collage of obscure memories. So them storming the beach or engaged in a firefight in the jungle, it all feels like a dream that isn't happening in real time and out of sequence. The closest thing to a scene tethered to reality that breaks the weird flow of dreamlike distance on the scenes would be the artillery barrage before the first battle, and when Woody Harrelson is yelling at that soldier who's faking being sick to get out of combat.
Chico, you get up right now, I'll kick you so hard in the stomach.
Everything just feels so removed. You just feel so removed from the present, like you're not actually there with them. It's like you're daydreaming or you're dozing off. Or the best way to describe it is kind of like when you have to read a book, but your mind wanders. You're physically seeing the words, but you're not retaining any of it. It's like the same thing. You don't feel like you're with the soldiers in the present. You just feel like you're removed and you're off drifting somewhere else. It's weird, but the movie, you just don't feel grounded to the present and you don't feel tethered to what's actually happening. And when I mentioned that there isn't a central protagonist, I mean there's more focus on Jim Caviezel's character, but he's definitely not the main character, especially considering that Sean Penn is top billed and the screen time and perspectives are shared by the massive cast. And actually, this is an interesting fun fact that Adrien Brody was cast as the lead role because his character was the protagonist of the source material book and screenplay, but Terrance Malick's original cut was 5 hours long, and he ended up cutting the majority of Brody's scenes, which basically reduced him to a non-speaking role. Actually, I'm pretty sure that this is all the lines he has in the nearly 3-hour movie.
Get back. Get back, there's trouble. Fall back.
And speaking of the characters, I gotta say the thing that bothered me is how much insubordination comes from the main characters. It's always a drag in war movies when they're soldiers who don't obey their commanding officers, but my God, this movie's full of that. For example, the opening scene and the introduction to Jim Caviezel's private wit. He's seen going AWOL and hiding from his army unit, which apparently is a common thing for the soldier. Then we have the big guy faking illness to avoid battle and him refusing Woody Harrelson's orders.
You ain't sick, get up.
Yes, Sergeant. I would have, but I couldn't.
After that, we see Sean Penn's character, Sergeant Welsh, threaten to punch his captain and resign after he's told he'll be recommended for the Silver Star.
Captain, you say one more word to thank me, I'm gonna knock you right in the teeth.
Which then leads to the captain straight up refusing to follow orders from his superior, Colonel Tall.
Sir, I must tell you that I refuse to obey your order.
Then there's that scene where Gaff is able to get Colonel Tall to stop his planned attack just by giving him a dirty look, and there's no repercussions for any of this. Whit is made a stretcher bearer, but comes back to his unit after he asks his captain, basically getting away with going AWOL. That big guy's allowed to leave his fellow soldiers and not get court-martialed.
Drop your gear, Seco. I'm taking the medics.
Thank you, Sergeant.
Sergeant Welsh isn't reprimanded for threatening his superior, and Captain Staros is removed from command, but Colonel Tall recommends him for the Silver Star and the Purple Heart, but he's told he can apply for the JAG in Washington and doesn't put his refusal to obey orders in any formal records. So, despite being taken away from his men, that's a very light punishment for insubordination. And Gaff, I mean, he didn't actually disobey Tall, but he gives him a dirty look, and the colonel changes his mind on the planned attack and tells Gaff,
You're like a son to me, John. I'm gonna make sure that you get everything that you deserve.
Also, I wasn't a fan of the voiceover work. I really didn't like how the film featured the personal thoughts and perspectives of all these characters. Like, I didn't like how the movie would rapidly shift focus from one person to the next. We hear the personal thoughts of so many characters, even if they aren't important or have minimal screen time. Not to mention that some of those lines that come from these voiceovers were really bad. Like, just listen to this.
I killed a man. Worst thing you can do. Worse than rape.
I mean, honestly, killing a man is worse than... Obviously, but that's just a really weird thing to say. Like, that's your first thought after shooting someone to death? Or, I don't know, maybe that's supposed to be the character's reflection of it after recalling this specific memory. But that sucked, to be honest. And it just goes back to my previous point on how the movie doesn't feel present, because we have a conglomerate of different thoughts that take you out of the moment and make you think, is this really happening in the present, or is this a flashback memory? It really messes up the tone and timeline. Now, I'll be frank, this doesn't feel like a war movie at all. That's a weird thing to say, because if you were to remove the sound and isolate specific shots of the film, you'll see rifle fire, soldiers, explosions, so clearly it's a war movie, but it really doesn't feel like one. The movie's a pseudo-spiritual, pseudo-philosophical mess. We hear this mystical music, we hear cheesy, phony philosophy from the voiceovers, and overall, it overtakes the mood of war, and you get a wannabe metaphysical film, which, in my opinion, didn't work. Like, some of these philosophical lines were just pretentious.
But just dirt.
This great evil, where's it come from?
To me, that doesn't work, and some of the battle scenes dragged on a little too long. Also, some of the acting was way over the top and a little silly. So, overall, I'd say those are my main issues with the movie. Now, there are some things that I really did enjoy about The Thin Red Line. Firstly, some of the combat in this movie was pretty cool. I love the artillery barrage scene.
What kind of artillery support do we have, sir? Over.
2 batteries of 105s.
They won't make a dent in that position. Over.
The river scene, and the battle where the soldiers were in the grassy knoll and Woody Harrelson pulls the pin off his grenade that was still attached to his belt. And the tall grass was awesome. I'm a sucker for combat scenes where the soldiers are crouching in tall grass and shooting it out with an unseen enemy. Also, I think Woody Harrelson knocked it out of the park. He and Sean Penn were probably the best performances of the movie.
I might be the best friend you ever had. You don't even know it.
It's just a shame that Woody Harrelson went a little too soon. And obviously it goes without saying, Jim Caviezel is a great actor and his screen presence was awesome, otherworldly, and dare I say magical.
You're a magician to me.
I still see a spark in you.
I really like Jim Caviezel, and he was fantastic in this movie. And I did like the opening scene where Whit was among the native Pacific Islanders while they were singing. That was pretty cool. And some scenes were actually very enjoyable. The dialogue between Tall and Staros throughout the movie was pretty sharp. And I really liked this one quote in particular.
Look at this jungle. Look at those vines swallowing everything. Nature's cruel, Staros.
I think that's a good quote, and it's true. It rings true to life, and it's very profound. And Nick Nolte, despite overacting in a few scenes, was pretty entertaining. I think if you were to watch this movie in segments by individually watching certain scenes by themselves, you could enjoy what you're seeing, but watching it from start to finish is not that much fun. I definitely think this is the kind of movie you can look back on and say way after the fact that it's a good movie. I did have that suspicion while watching the movie, and I thought maybe I will like it eventually, because sometimes the first viewing experience of some movies isn't that great. And after a few watches, I end up loving the movie. In fact, some of my favorite movies, I hated the first time I watched them, and then came around to love them. Prime examples would be The French Connection and Apocalypse Now. Who knows, maybe in 10 years, I might look back and say, this this is a good movie. Because a lot of people say that in reference to this movie. Overall, I'd say The Thin Red Line is not that great of a movie. I'd give it 4 out of 10. It's not a horrible movie, but I'm not a fan. You know, I've heard some people say that this movie failed at the box office because it had to compete with Saving Private Ryan, but I disagree with that. Saving Private Ryan was just a better movie, and I can totally see why The Thin Red Line was not a box office hit, and why it's more of an obscure film. Well, anyway, guys, that's gonna wrap up the review. What did you think about The Thin Red Line? Did you like it? Do you agree? Let me know by commenting below. Be sure to like this video and subscribe. Also, check me out on Instagram. That will be linked in the description below. Give me a follow. And FYI, I started a new YouTube channel that's going to be linked below as well. Definitely check that out. And I'll see you next time on the next Unpopular Opinion.